Money whispers, but true wealth is utterly silent. And absolute power. Absolute power sits patiently in seat 1A, sipping sparkling water and waiting for the mask to slip. When you wear unbranded cashmere sweatpants and a simple cotton shirt to fly international first class, people make assumptions. They look at the color of your skin, the lack of gaudy designer logos on your carry-on, and they instantly write a narrative about who you are and where you belong. For lead flight attendant Catherine Luciano, that arrogant narrative was about to cost her everything. She thought she was putting a confused, entitled seat stealer in her place. She had absolutely no idea she was trying to publicly humiliate the new majority owner of the very airline she worked for. The fluorescent lights of JFK International Airport's Terminal 8 hummed with the frantic, sterile energy of a Friday evening in early autumn. Outside, a miserable sheet of rain battered the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, turning the tarmac into a blurry sea of flashing amber and red lights. Inside, the world was a cacophony of rolling suitcases, garbled overhead announcements, and the impatient sighs of travelers desperate to be anywhere but there. Josephine Callahan, however, was an island of absolute calm. At 42, Josephine had spent the last decade orchestrating some of the most aggressive and brilliant corporate turnarounds in the aviation and logistics sectors. Her private equity firm, Vanguard Horizon Group, had finalized the acquisition of Meridian Skies just 48 hours ago. The legacy airline was hemorrhaging money, plagued by outdated management and a rapidly deteriorating customer service reputation. Josephine hadn't bought it to strip it and sell it for parts. She had bought it because she loved aviation and she knew exactly how to fix it. But fixing it required seeing the rot firsthand. That was why she was currently standing in the priority boarding lane for Meridian Skies Flight 402 to London Heathrow, traveling entirely incognito. There was no corporate entourage, no advanced warning to the flight crew, and certainly no press release. Her executive assistant had booked the ticket under her legal name, which wasn't yet associated with the shell company that had officially signed the acquisition papers. Josephine was dressed for a red-eye flight, not a boardroom. She wore charcoal grey, high-quality but completely unbranded lounge pants, a comfortable black long-sleeved shirt, and a pair of spotless white sneakers. Her natural hair was pulled back into a neat, unpretentious puff. To the untrained eye, she looked like an incredibly comfortable, perhaps slightly tired ordinary traveler. She carried only a weathered leather tote bag that had seen her through 10 years of ruthless negotiations. As she approached the first-class boarding podium, the gate agent, a young man whose name tag read Timothy, barely glanced up from his monitor. "Economy boarding hasn't started yet, ma'am," Timothy said, his tone clipped and exhausted. "Zone 4 will be called in about 30 minutes. Please step aside so first-class and diamond tier members can board." Josephine didn't sigh, she didn't roll her eyes, she simply held out her digital boarding pass on her phone screen. "I believe they just called first class, Timothy." Timothy finally looked up. His eyes darted from Josephine's comfortable attire to her face, and then, with a slight frown of disbelief, down to the scanner. He took the phone, almost snatching it, and held it against the red laser. Beep. The screen flashed a bright, undeniable green. Seat 1A. Timothy's posture stiffened, a flush of pink creeping up his neck. "My apologies, Ms. Callahan. You can go ahead down the jet bridge." "Thank you," Josephine said mildly, retrieving her phone. She noted the interaction in her mental ledger. Strike one for customer assumption. The walk down the jet bridge was freezing, the chilled air a stark contrast to the stuffy terminal. As Josephine stepped through the heavy metal door of the Boeing 777, she was greeted by the familiar smell of aviation fuel, polished plastic, and synthetic citrus air freshener. Standing in the galley, radiating a practiced, frosty kind of glamour, was Catherine Luciano. Catherine had been a flight attendant for Meridian Skies for 8 years, and she wore her seniority like a crown. She was immaculately groomed, blonde hair pulled into a flawless French twist, uniform perfectly tailored, wearing the signature crimson scarf of the lead first-class purser. Catherine prided herself on being the gatekeeper of the elite. In her mind, the first-class cabin was an exclusive club, and she was the bouncer. She preferred serving celebrities, tech moguls, and old-money aristocrats who tipped well and fed her ego. As Josephine stepped onto the plane, Catherine was in the middle of warmly greeting a wealthy-looking elderly couple. When she turned and her eyes landed on Josephine, the professional, beaming smile instantly vanished, replaced by a tight, strained line. Her gaze swept over Josephine's sweatpants, the simple tote bag, and her skin color, performing a rapid, brutal calculus that Josephine had seen a million times before in boardrooms and high-end boutiques. "Excuse me," Catherine said, stepping smoothly into the aisle, effectively blocking Josephine's path. "The entrance for the main cabin and premium economy is just down this hall and to the right. Keep walking past the partition." Josephine stopped, looking directly into Catherine's heavily mascaraed eyes. "I'm not heading to the main cabin." Catherine's smile became aggressively polite, the kind of smile that is entirely devoid of warmth. "I understand it can be confusing, especially if it's your first time flying on a wide-body jet. But this section here is our first-class cabin. Only passengers with first-class tickets are permitted in this area. If you just head back—" "I am in the first-class cabin," Josephine interrupted softly, her voice smooth and steady. She didn't raise her volume, but the absolute certainty in her tone made the elderly couple behind Catherine pause and look back. Catherine's jaw tightened. The disrespect of being interrupted clearly rankled her. "Ma'am, I need to keep this aisle clear for our priority boarding passengers. May I see your boarding pass?" It wasn't a request, it was a demand. Josephine calmly pulled up her phone again and held it out. Catherine leaned in, squinting at the screen as if she expected it to be a poorly photoshopped fake. She read the name, Josephine Callahan, and the seat assignment, 1A. For a split second, confusion flashed across Catherine's face, quickly followed by irritation. She didn't apologize. She didn't welcome Josephine aboard. Instead, she handed the phone back with a dismissive flick of her wrist. "Seat 1A is the first suite on the left," Catherine said coldly, turning her back on Josephine to greet a white man in a bespoke suit who had just boarded behind her. "Mr. Pendleton, so wonderful to see you again. Let me take your coat." Josephine watched the instantaneous transformation from hostile gatekeeper to fawning servant with clinical interest. She walked past Catherine and settled into Seat 1A, a spacious, semi-enclosed suite that desperately needed an upholstery upgrade, a detail she immediately logged in her memory. She pulled out a small, sleek notebook and a pen, quietly writing down a few observations. The flight hadn't even pushed back from the gate, and the rot was already fully visible. Alfred Pendleton was a man who moved through the world, operating under the steadfast assumption that the universe existed primarily to cater to his comfort. A mid-level executive at a pharmaceutical firm, he was a frequent flyer on Meridian skies, a status he leveraged with exhausting regularity. He wore a heavy gold watch that he made sure to flash whenever he gestured, and he spoke with a loud, booming voice that demanded an audience. Alfred's ticket was for Seat 1B, the suite directly across the aisle from Josephine. However, Alfred hated 1B. He preferred the window suite of 1A. Usually, when 1A was occupied by a junior colleague or a solitary traveler who looked pliable, Alfred would simply ask them to switch, utilizing a mix of aggressive charm and corporate bullying. As Alfred settled into 1B, he glanced across the aisle. He saw Josephine. He saw a black woman in casual clothes, sitting in his preferred seat, quietly writing in a notebook. To Alfred, the visual didn't compute with the environment. In his worldview, people who looked like Josephine, dressed like Josephine, didn't sit in 1A. He leaned across the aisle, not bothering with a polite introduction. "Excuse me." "Miss." Josephine looked up from her notebook, her expression neutral. "Yes? I think you might be in my seat," Alfred declared smoothly, unbuttoning his suit jacket. "Or, at the very least, you're in the wrong cabin. This is first class." "I am aware," Josephine said, her voice remaining perfectly even, "and this is my assigned seat. 1A. Alfred chuckled, a condescending, breathy sound. "Right. Look, maybe there was a glitch at the gate. It happens. But I always fly in 1A. I have a very important meeting in London tomorrow, and I need the window seat to sleep properly. If you could just gather your things." He waved a hand vaguely toward the rear of the plane. I'm sure the flight attendants can find where you're actually supposed to be." Josephine didn't move an inch. She didn't blink. "I suggest you speak to the flight attendant if you are confused about your seating assignment, Mr. Pendleton, Alfred Pendleton, Diamond Medallion member," he stated as if reciting a royal title. He was visibly annoyed now. The woman wasn't backing down, and she wasn't intimidated by his status. Right on cue, Catherine appeared in the aisle, carrying a silver tray of pre-departure champagne flutes. She sensed the tension immediately and zeroed in on Alfred with a sympathetic, overly attentive expression. "Is everything all right here, Mr. Pendleton?" Catherine asked, entirely ignoring Josephine. "Catherine, good to see you," Alfred said, leaning back with an exaggerated sigh. "There seems to be a mix-up. This young lady is sitting in 1A. I'd like to get settled if you don't mind sorting this out." Catherine turned slowly to face Josephine. The cold, tightly wound hostility from the jet bridge was back. Now amplified by the presence of a VIP passenger she wanted to appease. "Ma'am," Catherine said, her voice dropping an octave, carrying the sharp edge of a reprimand. "I checked your boarding pass at the door, but we seem to have a conflict. I need you to show it to me again, right now." Josephine slowly closed her notebook. The absolute gall of the situation was almost fascinating. She was essentially watching a live-action stress test of her company's worst cultural flaws. "You verified my boarding pass 3 minutes ago," Josephine pointed out calmly. "And I am verifying it again," Catherine snapped, dropping the pretense of customer service entirely. "Mr. Pendleton is a high-tier elite member of this airline. If there has been a system error placing a standby or upgraded passenger in a premium suite over a paying Diamond member, I need to correct it. So, your boarding pass, please." A standby or upgraded passenger. The assumption was glaring, offensive, and entirely rooted in bias. Catherine had decided, based on nothing but visual prejudice, that Josephine hadn't paid the $12,000 fare for the seat. Josephine unlocked her phone and placed it flat on the center console of the suite. "Here you go." Catherine snatched the phone up. She stared at the screen. It still said Josephine Callahan. "Flight 402, seat 1A, first class." Alfred leaned over, peering at the screen. "Well?" he demanded impatiently. "Did she sneak up here?" Catherine's mind raced. She was backed into a corner of her own making. The system clearly showed Josephine in 1A. But Catherine's pride, coupled with her deep-seated prejudice and her desire to placate Alfred Pendleton, overrode her training and common sense. She convinced herself that there had to be a mistake. People like Josephine simply didn't belong in her first-class cabin unless they had scammed the system or gotten lucky with an operational upgrade. "I apologize for the confusion, Mr. Pendleton," Catherine said, handing the phone back to Josephine, though she avoided eye contact with her. "There has clearly been a computer glitch at the gate. Ms. Callahan's ticket must be a deeply discounted or standby fare that incorrectly printed as 1A. Josephine raised an eyebrow. "A computer glitch?" "Yes," Catherine said, finally looking at Josephine, her eyes narrowing with malicious authority. "The system made an error. Mr. Pendleton is a Diamond member and requires this suite. I'm going to have to ask you to collect your bag and move." "Move where?" Josephine asked softly. "I will find you an available seat in premium economy," Catherine declared, as if she were doing Josephine a massive favor. "If that cabin is full, you will have to take a seat in the main cabin. We can process a partial refund for the inconvenience once we land in London." Josephine sat back in the plush leather seat, crossing her arms over her chest. The sheer, unadulterated audacity was breathtaking. She was being demoted on her own airline by an employee who was openly prioritizing a white man's comfort over a black woman's legitimately purchased premium ticket. "I am not moving," Josephine stated clearly, her voice echoing slightly in the quiet cabin. Other passengers were beginning to stare. "I paid full fare for this seat. I hold the reservation for this seat. Mr. Pendleton's preference does not override my ticket. If he is unhappy with 1B, he is welcome to take the seat you are offering in economy." Alfred scoffed loudly, his face turning red. "Listen here." "No, you listen," Catherine interrupted, stepping closer to Josephine's suite, invading her personal space. Her face was flushed with anger. You are causing a disturbance. You do not dictate the seating arrangements on my aircraft. I am the lead flight attendant, and I am giving you a lawful crew member instruction. You will vacate this seat immediately, or I will have you removed from this flight entirely." The first-class cabin fell dead silent. The only sound was the rhythmic thrum of the auxiliary power unit beneath the floorboards and the heavy rain lashing against the fuselage. Every eye in the premium cabin was locked onto seat 1A. Josephine looked at Catherine Luciano. She saw the furious, self-righteous glint in the flight attendant's eyes. She saw the way Alfred Pendleton was smirking, crossing his arms, looking victorious before the battle was even over. A lesser woman might have felt humiliated. A lesser woman might have felt the crushing weight of being publicly degraded, of having her legitimacy questioned so aggressively in a room full of wealthy strangers. But Josephine Callahan wasn't a lesser woman. She was an apex predator in the corporate world. She dismantled hostile boards of directors for breakfast. A bigoted flight attendant and an entitled middle manager were nothing but ants on her picnic blanket. "A lawful crew member instruction," Josephine repeated, tasting the words. "Let's be very clear about what is happening here, Catherine." Josephine made a point of reading the woman's name tag aloud. "You are ordering a fully ticketed, paying first-class passenger to vacate her seat because another passenger simply wants it. And you are doing so based on an imaginary computer glitch that you have fabricated because you refuse to believe I belong in this cabin." Catherine's eyes widened slightly. Passengers rarely spoke back with such articulate surgical precision. Usually they panicked, got angry, or cried. Josephine was doing none of those things. She was completely composed, and that composure infuriated Catherine even more. "I am not going to argue with you," Catherine hissed, leaning in closer, her voice a venomous whisper meant only for Josephine. "You are making a scene. People like you always think you can game the system and then play the victim when you get caught. Now get up, grab your cheap bag, and walk to the back of the plane before I call Port Authority. People like you." There it was. The quiet part said out loud, though hushed enough for plausible deniability. Josephine reached down and picked up her weathered leather tote. For a brief second, Alfred Pendleton beamed, assuming she was finally complying. Catherine stepped back, looking smug. Instead of standing, Josephine placed the bag on her lap, unzipped it, and pulled out her notebook and pen. She clicked the pen. "I want to make sure I have this entirely accurate," Josephine said, her voice carrying beautifully across the hushed cabin. "You are officially threatening to have me arrested and removed from the aircraft because I will not surrender my legally purchased seat to Mr. Pendleton. I am enforcing airline policy." Catherine raised her voice, losing her cool as the murmurs in the cabin began to turn against her. A passenger in 2F, a wealthy tech executive, leaned over and muttered, "Just leave the poor woman alone. She has the ticket." Catherine spun around, glaring at the tech executive. "This is a crew matter. Please stay out of it." She turned back to Josephine, her face now a mask of pure, desperate authority. "This is your final warning. Move, or I am calling the captain and airport security." "Call them," Josephine said simply. Catherine blinked. "Excuse me?" "Call the captain," Josephine repeated, gesturing toward the cockpit door with her pen. "In fact, I insist upon it. I would love to hear Captain—" She paused, looking at the crew manifest she had memorized earlier that day. "Captain Mitchell's take on this situation." Alfred Pendleton let out a dramatic groan. "Oh, for God's sake, are we really going to delay the entire flight for this? Just throw her off. I have a schedule to keep." "I am handling it, Mr. Pendleton," Catherine snapped, her stress levels redlining. She grabbed the interphone handset from the bulkhead wall and punched in the code for the flight deck. Josephine sat back, observing. She was mentally drafting the termination paperwork for Catherine Luciano. But beyond that, she was formulating a broader company policy overhaul. If this was how a first-class passenger was treated, she shuddered to think what happened to marginalized passengers in the back of the plane. "Captain Mitchell," Catherine said into the phone, her voice shaking slightly with adrenaline. "We have a severe passenger disturbance in first class. A woman is refusing to vacate a seat that she is not entitled to, and she is being belligerent and uncooperative. I need you to authorize a security removal." There was a pause as the captain spoke on the other end. Josephine couldn't hear his words, but she saw Catherine's face tighten. "No, sir, she is not calming down." Catherine lied smoothly. "She is aggressive. She is disrupting the boarding process and harassing a Diamond Medallion member. We cannot push back with her on board." Another pause. "Thank you, Captain," Catherine said, hanging up the phone with a sharp click. She turned to Josephine, a look of grim triumph on her face. "The captain has authorized your removal. Port Authority police are on their way down the jet bridge right now. You played a stupid game, miss, and you lost. I highly suggest you gather your things and walk off this plane before they drag you off." Alfred Pendleton clapped his hands together slowly, twice. Finally, common sense prevails. Josephine did not pack her things. She did not stand up. She reached into her tote bag one more time. She bypassed the standard identification she had used at TSA and pulled out a heavy, matte black carbon fiber card. It wasn't a credit card. It was an all-access, highest-level global aviation clearance badge, issued only to C-suite executives and board members of major airlines. It bore the newly minted corporate logo of Meridian Sky's parent company, Vanguard Horizon Group. She placed it face down on her lap. She would wait for the police. She wanted an audience for what was about to happen next. "We'll see who is walking off this plane, Catherine," Josephine said softly, her eyes locking onto the flight attendants with an intensity that suddenly made the cabin feel 10 degrees colder. "We will definitely see." The tension in the first-class cabin of Meridian Sky's Flight 402 had become a physical, suffocating presence. The wealthy passengers who had previously been sipping pre-departure champagne were now completely silent, their eyes darting between the unbothered woman in seat 1A and the visibly vibrating flight attendant standing in the aisle. In Seat 2F, a young software developer named Greg had subtly angled his smartphone, the red recording light blinking ominously against the dark leather of his seatback. Then came the sound. Over the low hum of the Boeing 777's ventilation system, heavy, rhythmic footsteps echoed down the jet bridge. Catherine Luciano's posture instantly shifted. The panicked hostility that had been cracking her professional veneer was replaced by a look of profound, smug vindication. She smoothed the front of her tailored uniform skirt and adjusted her crimson scarf, preparing to play the role of the embattled, righteous crew member. Alfred Pendleton, leaning heavily against the console of seat 1B, let out a loud theatrical sigh of relief. "Finally, they're here. Unbelievable that we have to delay an international flight for this nonsense." Two Port Authority police officers stepped through the heavy metal door. They wore tactical vests over their dark blue uniforms, their duty belts laden with heavy equipment. The lead officer, a tall, broad-shouldered man whose name tag read Kowalski, scanned the galley before his eyes locked onto Catherine. His partner, Officer Reyes, a sharp-eyed woman with her hand resting cautiously near her radio, stepped in behind him. "Evening," Officer Kowalski said, his voice a deep, gravelly baritone that commanded immediate attention. "We got a call about a passenger disturbance and a refusal to deplane." "Yes, officers, thank God you're here." Catherine stepped forward, her voice suddenly taking on a breathy, slightly shaken quality that was Oscar-worthy. She pointed a manicured finger directly at Josephine. "This passenger, she is sitting in a first-class suite she is not ticketed for. I have given her multiple lawful crew member instructions to relocate to her proper seat or exit the aircraft, and she has become aggressively non-compliant." Kowalski's gaze shifted to Josephine. He expected to see a flushed, irate passenger, perhaps someone intoxicated, or a frantic traveler having a mental breakdown. That was the usual profile for a forcible removal. Instead, he saw a woman sitting in absolute serene stillness. Josephine's legs were elegantly crossed. Her hands rested lightly on a weathered leather tote bag on her lap. She wasn't glaring. She wasn't crying. She was simply looking at the officers with the calm, calculating assessment of an apex predator, watching a very slow, very foolish prey wander into her territory. "Ma'am," Officer Kowalski said, adopting a firm, practiced tone designed to de-escalate but demand compliance. He stepped into the aisle, stopping just short of Josephine's suite. "I'm going to need you to gather your personal belongings and step off the aircraft with us. We can sort out any ticketing disputes at the gate, but right now the captain wants you off the plane." Just cuff her and drag her out, Alfred Pendleton interjected loudly from across the aisle. She's trespassing at this point. I have a very important board meeting in London tomorrow, and she is holding up millions of dollars in business. Officer Reyes shot Alfred a withering look. Sir, please remain quiet and let us handle this. Josephine finally spoke. Her voice was perfectly level, devoid of any panic or anger, yet it carried an authority that made Officer Kowalski instinctively stand a little straighter. Officer Kowalski, Officer Reyes, Josephine said, reading their nameplates with deliberate slowness. Good evening. Before I make any sudden movements to gather my belongings, I would like to make sure your body cameras are currently active and recording audio. Both officers blinked, momentarily thrown off script. Kowalski frowned. They are active, ma'am, but that doesn't change the fact that… Excellent, Josephine interrupted smoothly. Because I want a crystal clear, federally admissible record of what is transpiring here. This flight attendant, Catherine Luciano, has just informed you that I am not ticketed for this seat. That is a fabricated statement. She is attempting to utilize local law enforcement to forcefully remove a fully paying, legitimate first-class passenger simply because this man… She gestured vaguely toward Alfred without looking at him. Wants my window seat. Catherine gasped, clutching a hand to her chest. That is an absolute lie. Officers, she is completely unhinged. She is a standby passenger whose ticket glitched. She is verbally abusing me and Mr. Pendleton. I have my boarding pass, which she scanned at the door, and which I presented to her again inside the cabin, Josephine continued, ignoring Catherine's outburst entirely. The system confirmed me in 1A. She refused to accept it based on her own personal biases. Furthermore, she lied to the captain, claiming I was aggressive and causing a disturbance, which is a federal offense, interfering with flight crew duties through falsified reports. I am sitting perfectly still. Officer Kowalski looked between the hyperventilating flight attendant and the unnervingly calm woman in the seat. He had worked airport security for 15 years. His gut told him something was deeply, fundamentally wrong with this picture. Josephine did not look or act like a fraud. She acted like someone who owned the entire building. Ma'am, regardless of the ticketing issue, Kowalski said, his tone softening slightly, though he remained firm, the captain is the ultimate authority on this aircraft. If he says you are off, you are off. FAA regulations are very clear. If you don't step out of the seat, we will have to place you under arrest for trespassing and failure to comply with a lawful order. I am well aware of Title 14 of the Code of Federal Regulations, Part 91.3, Officer, Josephine recited effortlessly, the legal jargon rolling off her tongue with terrifying precision. The pilot in command is directly responsible for the operation of the aircraft. However, an order based on fraudulent information provided by a rogue crew member exposes the airline to catastrophic legal liability. I will not be stepping off this plane. Alfred Pendleton threw his hands in the air. This is absurd. Arrest her. Why are you debating her? She's clearly a squatter. Mr. Pendleton, Josephine said, finally turning her head to look the Diamond Medallion member dead in the eyes. Her gaze was like striking a match in a dark room, sudden, sharp, and incredibly dangerous. I suggest you close your mouth. Every word you say is currently being documented, and you are actively participating in the harassment of a fellow passenger. Your company's HR department would not be thrilled to see the video that the gentleman in 2F is currently recording. Alfred paled slightly, his eyes darting back to Greg in 2F, who quickly lowered his phone but kept the camera lens pointed forward. Alfred snapped his mouth shut, sinking back into his seat. Catherine was losing control of the narrative, and she knew it. She stepped forward, her face flushed with a mix of fury and panic. Officers, remove her, now, or I am calling the terminal manager and the FAA to report you for failing to assist a flight crew. Officer Reyes stepped forward, putting a hand on Kowalski's arm, holding him back from grabbing Josephine. Reyes looked at Josephine's weathered tote bag, then at her unbranded but clearly expensive clothing, and finally at the absolute lack of fear in her eyes. Let's slow down, Reyes said calmly. She pulled her radio from her belt. Dispatch, this is Unit 4. We need the station duty manager down at Gate 42, Flight 402, immediately. We have a disputed passenger removal and need ground verification before we proceed with an arrest." "No," Catherine shouted, her voice shrill. "You don't need a manager. The captain gave the order." "The captain gave the order based on your word, Miss Luciano," Officer Reyes said sharply, dropping the polite pretense. "And right now, this passenger is being perfectly compliant with us, while you are screaming. We are waiting for the manager." Josephine allowed a tiny, almost imperceptible smile to touch the corners of her mouth. She reached into her tote bag and placed the heavy, matte black carbon fiber card face down on her lap next to her phone. The trap had officially closed. Now they were just waiting for the audience to assemble. 5 agonizing minutes passed. The heavy rain continued to drum against the fuselage, a rhythmic soundtrack to the suffocating silence in the cabin. Catherine paced in the galley, her breathing shallow, aggressively ignoring the judgmental stares of the other first-class passengers. Alfred Pendleton was sweating, repeatedly checking his gold watch, his previous bravado entirely evaporated. Finally, the sharp, authoritative click of the cockpit door unlocking echoed through the front of the plane. Captain Robert Mitchell emerged. He was a veteran pilot in his late 50s, with salt and pepper hair and a face lined with decades of high-altitude sun exposure. He looked profoundly annoyed. Delays cost money, burned fuel, and ruined crew rest schedules. "What in the world is going on out here?" Captain Mitchell demanded, his deep voice carrying easily over the ambient noise. He looked at the 2 police officers, then at Catherine, and finally down at Josephine. "I gave the order to offload the disruptive passenger 10 minutes ago. Why are we still at the gate?" Before anyone could answer, a breathless man in a sharp navy blue suit burst through the aircraft door, pushing past the gate agent. It was David Miller, the JFK station terminal manager for Meridian Skies. He clutched a glowing iPad to his chest, looking stressed and disheveled. I'm here, David panted, stepping into the galley. He looked at the police officers. "Officers, what's the situation?" Dispatch said there was a disputed removal. "David, thank goodness," Catherine rushed forward, practically throwing herself at the manager. "This woman," she pointed at Josephine again, "is refusing to leave 1A. She's a standby, her ticket glitched, and she's been horribly abusive to me and Mr. Pendleton. The captain authorized her removal, but the police are refusing to arrest her." Captain Mitchell frowned, looking at Josephine. He didn't see an abusive, unhinged standby passenger. He saw a sharply intelligent woman watching the chaos with terrifying composure. David Miller sighed, pulling up the flight manifest on his iPad. "All right, let's sort this out. Ma'am," he addressed Josephine with professional courtesy, "I apologize for the delay. Could I please see your boarding pass and a government-issued ID? We just need to verify your ticketing status in our primary database." "Of course, Mr. Miller," Josephine said. She didn't hand him the phone with the digital boarding pass. Instead, she picked up the matte black carbon fiber card from her lap. She extended her arm, holding it between 2 fingers. David stepped forward and took the card. At first glance, it looked like a sleek, heavy credit card. But as David turned it over in his hands, his eyes locked onto the deeply engraved metallic silver logo in the center. A minimalist compass rose dissecting a stylized horizon line. Beneath it, embossed in sharp lettering, were the words Vanguard Horizon Group, Executive Omni Clearance. Below that, the name Josephine Caldwell, Managing Partner and CEO. David Miller stopped breathing. The terminal manager stared at the card. He blinked hard, as if expecting the engraving to change. Just yesterday morning, a highly confidential top-priority memo had been blasted to every station manager, chief pilot, and lead purser in the Meridian Skies global network. The memo detailed the official finalization of the Vanguard Horizon Group acquisition. It included a mandate to prepare for aggressive, sweeping operational audits by the new ownership group, led by a ruthless private equity titan named Josephine Callahan. David's hands began to shake violently. He looked up slowly, his eyes wide with a terror so profound it made Officer Kowalski take a half-step forward in concern. "Mr. Miller, are you all right?" Captain Mitchell asked, noticing the blood completely draining from the manager's face. David couldn't speak. He looked from the black card to Josephine's face. He recognized her now. He had seen her picture in Forbes. He had seen her on Bloomberg TV, dismantling a hostile anchor with the same icy calm she was displaying right now. She wasn't just a VIP. She wasn't just a CEO. She was the woman who now owned the metal tube they were standing in, the jet fuel in its tanks, and the paychecks of every single employee in the building. Ms. Callahan, David finally choked out, his voice a pathetic, high-pitched squeak. I had absolutely no idea you were flying with us tonight. We didn't receive an executive movement notification. That was intentional, David, Josephine said, her voice smooth as glass. She finally uncrossed her legs and stood up. Despite wearing sneakers and sweatpants, Josephine suddenly seemed to tower over everyone in the cabin. The shift in her demeanor was seismic. She shed the persona of the quiet, compliant passenger and assumed the mantle of absolute, unquestioned authority. Catherine frowned, a knot of sickening confusion forming in her stomach. David, what are you talking about? Executive movement. She's a standby. David snapped his head toward Catherine, his eyes blazing with panic and fury. Shut up, Catherine. Just shut your mouth right now. He turned back to Josephine, practically bowing. Ms. Callahan, I cannot apologize enough for this. I don't know what has happened here, but I will fix it immediately. Who is she? Captain Mitchell demanded, his own authority feeling suddenly precarious. David swallowed hard. He looked at the captain, his voice trembling. Captain Mitchell, this is Josephine Callahan, the CEO of Vanguard Horizon Group, our new parent company. She is the majority owner of Meridian Skies. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating vacuum. In seat 2F, Greg, the software developer, let out a quiet, highly audible, "Oh damn." Alfred Pendleton's jaw literally dropped open. He shrank back into his seat, suddenly trying to make himself as small and invisible as physically possible. But it was Catherine Luciano who looked like she had just been shot. The color vanished from her perfectly made-up face, leaving her looking sickly and grey. Her eyes bugged out, darting frantically from David to the black card and finally to Josephine. Her mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish suffocating on a dock. All the arrogant bluster, the bigoted assumptions, the cruel superiority, it all instantly collapsed under the crushing weight of reality. "Owner?" Catherine whispered, the word barely making it past her lips. No, that's impossible. Look at her. Look at me." Josephine stepped out of her suite, moving into the aisle until she was inches away from Catherine. The flight attendant physically recoiled, pressing her back against the galley bulkhead. "Let's talk about what you saw when you looked at me, Catherine." Josephine's voice was low, lethal, and carried perfectly through the dead silent cabin. "You saw a black woman in casual clothes. You didn't see a first-class passenger. You didn't see a human being deserving of basic respect. You saw a target for your prejudice. You bypassed standard operational procedure, ignored a verified boarding pass, fabricated a computer glitch, and attempted to use local law enforcement to violently remove me from my own aircraft, all to appease a man who simply wanted a better view out the window." I, Catherine stammered, tears of sheer panic welling in her eyes. "I thought, the system, it must have—" "Do not insult my intelligence by doubling down on a lie," Josephine snapped, the sharp crack of her voice making both police officers flinch. "You weaponized your uniform and your authority against a passenger you deemed beneath you. If you did this to me, sitting in 1A, I know exactly how you treat the single mothers, the weary travelers, and the marginalized people sitting in row 45. Josephine turned her gaze to the cockpit door. "Captain Mitchell." The veteran pilot stiffened to attention. "Yes, Ms. Callahan. I am officially informing you that Catherine Luciano is a liability to the safety and operational integrity of this flight," Josephine declared coldly. "She has demonstrated a willingness to falsify reports to the flight deck and escalate situations aggressively without cause. I want her off my aircraft." Catherine let out a choked sob. "No, please, I have 8 years of seniority. You can't just—" "I can," Josephine interrupted, not raising her voice but silencing the flight attendant instantly with the sheer force of her presence. "And I just did." "David," the terminal manager jumped. "Yes, ma'am." Miss Luciano is suspended without pay, effective immediately, pending a full corporate investigation and termination hearing, Josephine instructed, her eyes locked onto Catherine's tear-streaked face. Collect her badge, her company manual, and escort her off this plane. If she resists, Officer Kowalski and Officer Reyes are right here to assist you with a trespassing charge. Josephine turned slightly, her gaze sweeping over the aisle to lock onto the cowering form of Alfred Pendleton. The pharmaceutical executive looked like he was going to be sick. "And Mr. Pendleton," Josephine said, her tone dripping with aristocratic disdain. "You seem to value your diamond medallion status quite highly. Enjoy it for the next 5 minutes. Because by the time we push back from this gate, your account will be permanently closed, your miles revoked, and you will be placed on Vanguard Horizon Group's internal, lifetime no-fly list," Alfred choked. You can't do that. I'm a paying customer. I have a meeting in London." "Then I highly suggest you start swimming," Josephine replied, "because you are not flying on my airline tonight. David, process a full refund for Mr. Pendleton's ticket and have security escort him back to the terminal." Josephine didn't wait for a response. She turned her back on the wreckage she had just created and calmly sat back down in Seat 1A. She smoothed her unbranded cashmere sweatpants, picked up her pen, and opened her notebook. "Captain Mitchell," Josephine said, not looking up from her notes, "please secure the cabin doors. We have a schedule to keep." David Miller, the terminal manager, did not hesitate. The paralyzing fear of his new CEO instantly transmuted into ruthless administrative efficiency. He had worked for Meridian Skies for 12 years, surviving 3 different management regimes, and he knew exactly how to read the room. Josephine Callahan was not making a threat. She was executing a localized corporate restructuring right there in the first-class cabin. "Miss Luciano," David said, his voice stripped of any previous camaraderie. He extended an open, expectant hand. "Your company identification badge, your Federal Aviation Administration crew member certificate, and your mobile in-flight device, now." Catherine looked completely destroyed. Her immaculate French twist seemed to have suddenly loosened, a stray blonde lock falling limply across her face. The crimson scarf, once her badge of elite authority, now looked like a glaring target. She looked at Officer Kowalski, silently begging for the intervention she had demanded just minutes prior. Kowalski simply crossed his arms over his tactical vest. "You heard your boss, ma'am. Hand over the property, grab your luggage, and step off the aircraft. If we have to physically remove you, you will be leaving Terminal 8 in handcuffs." Tears spilling freely down her heavily powdered cheeks, Catherine fumbled with the lanyard around her neck. Her hands shook so violently she could barely unclasp it. She practically threw the plastic badge and her company-issued tablet into David's waiting hands. She didn't look at Josephine. She couldn't. The sheer magnitude of her colossal, bigoted mistake was physically crushing her. She turned and stumbled toward the forward galley closet to retrieve her rolling suitcase. As she pulled it out, the wheels caught on the metal track, making a loud, grating noise that echoed in the silent cabin. It was the sound of a career ending. Without a word, Catherine Luciano began the longest walk of her life. She passed the elderly couple, who looked at her with undisguised pity. She passed Greg in seat 2F, whose smartphone was still subtly pointed in her direction, capturing every agonizing second of her public downfall. She trudged up the jet bridge, flanked by the 2 Port Authority officers, a disgraced gatekeeper cast out of her own kingdom. But the reckoning was only half over. David Miller turned his attention to seat 1B. Alfred Pendleton was frantically tapping on his phone, his face a mask of sweaty, indignant panic. "Mr. Pendleton," David said, his tone icy and resolute, "you are no longer a passenger on this flight, nor are you a customer of this airline. Please gather your belongings immediately." "This is an outrage," Alfred sputtered, his voice cracking as he finally found a shred of his former bravado. He stood up, jabbing a thick finger in David's direction. "I am the Regional Vice President of Omni Farm International. I have a critical merger meeting in London tomorrow morning. If I am not on this plane, millions of dollars are on the line. You are exposing this airline to a massive lawsuit." Josephine, who had been quietly writing in her notebook, didn't even look up. "Sue me, Alfred," she said, her voice dropping like a velvet-wrapped anvil into the cabin. Vanguard Horizon Group retains 3 of the most vicious corporate litigation firms on the eastern seaboard. I would eagerly welcome discovery where we can depose every witness in this cabin regarding your targeted harassment of a black woman over a window seat. I promise you, Omni Farm's board of directors will find the public relations fallout absolutely fascinating. Alfred's face drained of whatever color had returned to it. The threat wasn't empty, it was a guaranteed, career-ending promise. He looked around the cabin. No one was coming to his defense. The tech executive in 2F gave him a small, sarcastic wave. Defeated, humiliated, and suddenly realizing the catastrophic reality of his situation, Alfred grabbed his heavy leather briefcase and his tailored suit jacket. He didn't say another word. He practically scrambled out of the suite, keeping his head down as he scurried past David Miller and practically ran up the jet bridge, a man fleeing a burning building of his own making. David let out a long, shaky breath, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. He turned back to seat 1A. Ms. Callahan, the cabin is secure. Is there anything else you require before I clear the flight for pushback? Josephine finally closed her notebook and placed her pen inside her tote bag. She looked at David, her expression softening just a fraction, acknowledging his swift execution of her orders. Just ensure the remaining crew is aware that standard operating procedures are to be followed strictly, David, Josephine said evenly. No more computer glitches. No more prioritizing status over common decency. We are running an airline, not a country club. Yes, ma'am, absolutely. David nodded fervently. He stepped backward out of the aircraft, signaling to the gate agent. Captain Mitchell emerged briefly from the flight deck, looking at Josephine with a mix of deep respect and lingering shock. Cabin doors are closing, Ms. Callahan. We will have you in London in 6 hours and 40 minutes. Thank you, Captain, Josephine replied, picking up her sparkling water. Have a safe flight. As the heavy metal door swung shut with a definitive pressurized thud, a collective exhale swept through the first-class cabin. The remaining flight attendant, a young, wide-eyed man named Thomas, tentatively approached 1A, holding a fresh silver tray. Ms. Callahan, Thomas stammered politely. Would you care for a warm towel or another beverage before takeoff? Josephine smiled, a genuine warm smile that completely transformed her face. A warm towel would be lovely, Thomas. Thank you. And please, just treat me like any other passenger. You're doing a wonderful job. The fallout was not merely swift, it was biblical. By the time Flight 402 touched down in the grey, misty morning at London Heathrow, the world had fundamentally changed for Catherine Luciano and Alfred Pendleton. Greg, the software developer in 2F, had utilized the aircraft's high-speed Wi-Fi to upload a seamlessly edited 4-minute video of the entire altercation. He didn't post it to a niche forum. He posted it directly to LinkedIn and Twitter, tagging Meridian Skies, Vanguard Horizon Group, and, utilizing a quick background search, Omni Farm International. The caption was simple. Watch a racist flight attendant and an entitled VP try to bully a woman out of first class. Plot twist. She owns the airline. The video detonated across the internet. It was a masterclass in silent power versus loud prejudice. Viewers were captivated by Josephine's terrifying calm, Catherine's frantic bigotry, and Alfred's ultimate pathetic retreat. By Monday morning, the clip had amassed 40 million views across platforms. For Alfred Pendleton, the karma was absolute and devastating. He missed his flight, and consequently, he missed the critical Monday morning merger meeting in London. The deal collapsed, costing Omni Farm a projected 20% bump in their quarterly revenue. But the missed meeting was merely the match. The viral video was the gasoline. Omni Farm International, terrified of the massive public relations nightmare of having a senior executive globally branded as a racist bully, convened an emergency weekend board meeting. By Monday afternoon, a terse press release was issued. Alfred Pendleton had been terminated for cause, citing a severe violation of the company's code of ethics and conduct. He lost his job, his unvested stock options, and his golden parachute. His diamond medallion status was indeed revoked, leaving him stranded not just in his career, but in the terminal of public disgrace. Catherine Luciano's reality was equally grim. She attempted to contact her flight attendant union, claiming she was unfairly targeted by a rogue CEO and that the computer glitch was real. The union reps took one look at the viral video, cross-referenced it with the Port Authority police body cam footage that had been subpoenaed internally, and quietly declined to represent her in her termination hearing. The evidence was insurmountable. She had falsified a report to the captain, attempted to utilize law enforcement under false pretenses, and flagrantly violated federal aviation discrimination protocols. Catherine was officially fired, stripped of her flight benefits, and permanently blacklisted from ever working in commercial aviation again. The gatekeeper had permanently locked herself out. Meanwhile, at the corporate headquarters of Meridian Skies in Chicago, Josephine Callahan initiated a scorched earth restructuring. She didn't just fire the bad actors, she dismantled the toxic culture that allowed them to thrive. The executive team was gutted and replaced by leaders who understood that hospitality did not have a skin color or a dress code. She instituted mandatory rigorous bias training that wasn't just an online click-through course, but a monitored, immersive program. 6 months later, Meridian Skies began to rise from the ashes of its former reputation. Customer satisfaction scores skyrocketed. The airline became a case study in Harvard Business Review on how aggressive, principled leadership could instantly correct a failing corporate culture. And Josephine, she continued to fly incognito. She would occasionally show up on a red-eye to Seattle or a dawn flight to Miami, wearing her unbranded sweatpants and carrying her weathered tote bag. The staff learned very quickly that the most important person on the plane rarely wore a suit, never demanded attention, and was always watching. Power does not need to shout to be heard, nor does wealth need to flash gold to be recognized. The absolute dismantling of Catherine Luciano and Alfred Pendleton served as a brutal, necessary reminder that prejudice is not just a moral failing, it is a catastrophic professional liability. Josephine Callahan weaponized her silence, allowing the arrogant assumptions of a gatekeeper and an entitled passenger to build the very trap that destroyed them. The terminal of assumptions they operated in was torn down and replaced by a reality where respect was mandatory, regardless of the brand on a traveler's clothing or the color of their skin. In the end, the first-class cabin ceased to be a playground for the entitled and became exactly what it was meant to be: a seat you simply pay for. Karma, it turns out, flies commercial, and sometimes she owns the entire airline.